Welcome to the Explainer. I am so incredibly thrilled to have you here today because we're diving into a hidden science that affects literally every single one of us who gets behind the wheel of a car. We're talking about the invisible threat of tire aging. You might look at your tires, see good tread, and think, yeah, they're perfectly fine. But today, we're going to uncover the invisible forces of time, temperature, and rubber rot that could absolutely be compromising your safety without you even having a clue. Okay, let's just jump right into this. It's a question that completely flips our conventional understanding of tire safety totally upside down. For decades, we've all been taught to just look at the tread, right? You do the penny test, you check the mileage, and if the rubber looks thick enough, you assume you're good to go. But what if the real danger is completely invisible to the naked eye? Like, what if the tire is actually decaying from the inside out? All right, Section 1, the invisible mystery, inside a tread separation. To really get our heads around this, we have to rewind back to the massive tire recalls of 2000 and 2001. Millions of tires were failing, mostly on SUVs, and it was triggering catastrophic tread separations exactly like the one we're looking at here. When you're driving at highway speeds, there are these incredible centrifugal forces that can literally rip the top tread and the outer steel belt completely off the casing. It's terrifying. And to figure out why this was happening, scientists had to zoom way, way in. Deep within the internal structure of a radial tire, right between those heavy steel belts, lies something called skim stock, and at the edges, a wedge of rubber. Think of this as the biological equivalent of connective tissue holding the tire skeleton together. Well, researchers discovered that the fatal microscopic cracks that eventually cause that catastrophic tread separation, they actually start right here, deep inside the tire, in this specific skim and wedge rubber. Moving right along to Section 2, the real culprit. Oxygen. So, what's actually destroying this internal connective tissue? Surprisingly, the rubber isn't just fatiguing from the physical stress of driving, it's chemically reacting to the air itself. It's a process called diffusion-limited oxidation, or DLO. Think of your tire like a highly pressurized balloon. That high-pressure air trapped inside is constantly trying to escape, and as the oxygen slowly permeates through the inner lining and into that structural rubber, the rubber actively consumes it. In a very literal, chemical sense, your tires are suffocating themselves from the inside out. Now, check out how oxygen behaves at different temperatures. It's wild. At 20 degrees Celsius, oxygen actually permeates fairly deeply into the rubber layers. But at 70 degrees Celsius, those dark areas representing oxygen completely vanish near the outer edges. And that's because the intense heat causes the oxidation reaction to happen so incredibly fast that the oxygen gets entirely consumed by the inner layers of rubber before it can even reach the outside. And when that inner rubber eats up the oxygen, the chemical changes are just devastating. The oxidation actually increases the cross-link density of the rubber molecules. In plain English, the rubber stiffens up, and as it gets stiffer, its elasticity drops dramatically. But the most dangerous part is that its peel strength, its ability to actually hold those heavy steel belts together, absolutely plummets. Instead of stretching, that normally flexible skim rubber just becomes brittle, and microscopic cracks start growing rapidly between the steel belts. Which brings us to Section 3, time, temperature, and spares. All right, this science leads us to what I think is the most fascinating, myth-busting revelation of this whole explainer. Because if oxidation is constantly happening inside the tire, I really want you to think about this scenario. Say you have a pristine spare tire sitting in your trunk. It's never seen the pavement. It literally has 0 miles on it. Common sense tells us that 0 miles driven equals 0 damage, right? So is that tire still brand new? Well, the data reveals a mind-blowing reality. Absolutely not. Researchers found that an entirely unused spare tire oxidizes and ages at a staggering 70 to 80%, the rate of an actively driven on-road tire. That pristine spare sitting in your trunk right now is slowly decaying, losing its elasticity, and getting brittle without ever rolling a single inch. This crucial point is proven right here by what's called an Agagon plot, which basically maps stiffness against elasticity. Now, don't let the graph intimidate you. Just look at the data points. The black diamonds are driven tires, and the hollow squares are unused spares. Notice how they all cluster along the exact same downward slope? That proves the chemical degradation happening inside the tire is almost identical whether the car is doing 70 on the highway or just parked in a driveway. So if it's not miles, what's the single biggest factor driving that degradation? It's geography.
If we map out how much peel strength, again, that glue holding the steel belts together, is lost over time, you can see a huge split. The solid line represents tires driven in Phoenix, Arizona, while the dotted line represents cooler climates like Detroit and Hartford. Just look at how rapidly the peel strength completely drops off a cliff in Phoenix compared to those colder states.
Let's put some real numbers to this to put it in perspective. If we consider Phoenix as the baseline for the absolute fastest aging, we'll call that 100%. Tires in Los Angeles age only 57% as fast. And tires up in Detroit or Hartford, they age at just 42% of the Phoenix rate. Because heat acts as this massive accelerator for chemical oxidation, where you live is literally a matter of tire life and death. This brings us to a huge paradigm shift in automotive safety, perfectly captured by this quote from the researchers. They concluded that mileage is a relatively unimportant factor. Just let that sink in for a second. Mileage doesn't matter nearly as much as we thought. The true metrics for tire decay are time and temperature. Time allows the oxygen to permeate, and temperature acts like a volume dial, cranking up the speed of that chemical destruction.
Section 4. Recreating the desert. So once scientists figured out this terrifying, invisible mystery, they faced a massive engineering challenge. How do we predict this in the lab before these tires ever reach consumers? The industry had to completely overhaul its safety standards. Step 1, those old road wheel testing machines, they were fundamentally flawed because they only simulated mileage and completely ignored stationary oxidation. Step 2, getting out there and retrieving thousands of tires from the field finally revealed those vital time and temperature factors we just talked about. Which leads us to Step 3, temperature-controlled oven testing becoming the brand new gold standard for tire durability. But here's the catch. You can't just toss a tire into a blast furnace and call it a day. Scientists had to find this really tricky Goldilocks balance. They needed an oven hot enough to accelerate years of aging into just a few weeks, but not so hot that it actually ruined the underlying science and triggered a completely different type of chemical reaction. And here is exactly why that balance is so incredibly delicate. If the oven is too cold, the test takes years, which totally defeats the purpose of trying to accelerate things. But if you push the oven past 70 degrees Celsius, it gets way too hot. The oxygen just burns off at the surface instantly, causing oxygen starvation deep inside the rubber. That creates a false reading called anaerobic degradation, which does not match real-world aging at all. The just right sound? Exactly 70 degrees Celsius, using a pressurized 50-50 blend of oxygen and nitrogen to speed things up safely. And you know what? Lab tests confirm this works beautifully. When we look at an Ogden plot of an artificially oven-aged tire, it shows this linear downward slope that proves it is undergoing the exact same natural aerobic degradation we saw in tires retrieved from the scorching Phoenix desert. This lab test perfectly mimics what happens in the real world. But engineers don't just test for your average driver taking a quick trip to the grocery store. They know that driver habits and parking conditions vary wildly. I mean, if you park on black asphalt in full sun in Arizona, your tires are baking far, far more than someone parking in a nice shaded garage in Maine. Because of this massive variability, engineers have to continuously calibrate these oven tests to make sure the rubber can survive the absolute fastest aging, worst case scenario. Which leaves us with this final, honestly pretty provocative thought. The next time you walk out to your driveway, don't just look at the tread. Remember the invisible chemistry that is happening right now inside that casing. Your tires might look absolutely perfect on the outside, but how old is the rubber actually holding them together? It might just be time to go check those date codes on your sidewalls. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and hey, stay safe out there on the roads.